All right, so let's get going here. So everybody, thanks so much for joining in. My name's Scott, I'm the Canadian Fisherman, and tonight we're really excited. We've got two great guests to talk about a fun topic, which is catching big northern pike. And so we've got two experts with us. One is Colin McKeown. You've seen him on his TV shows and in all kinds of media opportunities with the new fly fisher. And we've got Kyle Polesky, owner-operator of Brace Lake Outfitters out of Nakeena, Ontario. And you would have seen Kyle on our very first episode of Meet the Outfitter. So gentlemen, before we get going, thank you so much for allocating your time tonight. I know I appreciate it. And I think that the folks that are going to be watching this now or recorded are going to benefit from it as well. So Colin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I guess I don't know how many people there that are watching are fly fishers, but I started out as a spin fisher. Always loved pike. You know, I used to fish around Perry Sound, Georgia Bay area. And oftentimes when I'd be casting for those beautiful smallmouth bass or walleye, I'd catch a big pike and it would scare the you-know-what out of me. And ever since then, I've had an addiction to catching pike, whether on a spinning rod or on a fly like this one. So even in my TV show, we try to, we do a lot of trout shows. We do bass, Atlantic salmon. I love going and doing big pike shows, like going up to Kyle's place and catching large northern pike, whether on top water, on streamers. It doesn't matter. It's just so exciting, gets my heart going.
Awesome. All right, over to you, Kyle. Bring us up to speed on Kyle Polesky.
Just like in the past, last time I was on, I said, born and bred in Northern Ontario. Owned a lodge for, I guess, almost 12 years, 11, 12 years now. And fishing's in my blood. It's what we do. I fish more than most lodge owners probably should. And we learn something every time we're out. So I can't wait to get this conversation going.
All right. All right, so folks, let's start here. And so, Colin, I'm going to throw it over to you, but it's pretty much spring now. Depending on whether you determine spring based on water temperatures or time of the year, I would still call this, kind of some spring conditions. Why don't you walk us through, if you're spring fishing for pike, maybe what's some of your preferred lures and maybe tactics, and if you're comfortable, talk about where, generally speaking, on a lake would you be looking?
Okay, so there's a couple things in what you're talking about here. When it's a spring, it really depends if it's right after ice out, the pike are in there, they're spawning, and so I'm always taught when I go up north, I'm there early, I love to go up and target those big northern pike, the females, which are typically the biggest ones, in the post spawn, and they're hanging close to where they spawn. Usually they're a little sulky for a few days afterwards, but get some warm, sunny days, and the water temperature's starting to go up, their metabolism's starting to kick over, and man, you'll see the monsters of a lake or river system in these back bays, shallow areas, weedy areas. Usually it's a combination of sand or mud. And one of the things I've learned over the years, both as a spin fisher and especially as a fly fisher, the great thing is that you're talking about pike that are 8 feet or less, and a lot of times you're going to sight fish to them. So it's really exciting time. I'd love to go up to your place sometime, Kyle, right after ice out in that 2-week window, because it must be pretty exciting. But the thing I learned was you've got to use small flies. Everyone always thinks you have to throw big lures and spinner baits, and a lot of the things I've learned over the years is that because their metabolism isn't fully engaged and the water temperatures are usually very cold still, they're hungry, but they're not going to chase the way they will when the water's a little bit warmer. So I tend to use a lot of smaller flies, let me show that like that, or that. And so I'm talking 3-4 inches, and I'm not throwing, bigger chickens like that. I've been to the lakes in Northern Ontario and been fishing there. The weeds are not even coming up barely. You can see them at the bottom. And one of my favorite things to do after the post spawn, by the way, is I love going to the rivers, where the rivers are flowing into big lakes in Northern Ontario. Well, the walleye are all coming down. They've just coming back from their spawn, and all the pike go there. And you'll see them everywhere, and laying on the bottom. You think they're logs, they're so big. But I noticed that they might even follow the big fly, or they'll follow a big rapala, but they won't eat it. They're looking for small and easy and slow. If I could say the number one thing, no matter whether you're throwing a fly or a lure, my piece of advice on spring fishing is slow.
Awesome. Listen, and you're talking about the you know, the creeks and the streams and things like that. I was up fishing on the Attawapiskat River 2 seasons ago, and you're absolutely right. We were right after you know, ice out, and it was like a buffet where those rivers were coming into the bigger river, and you know, you get the sense that the big pike were just sitting there and just having a snack bar. Kyle, take us through what you would do if you're looking at a spring pike.
Basically, you know, right along the same lines as Colin. I mean, springtime is river mouths and between two lakes are key. Any pinch points where there's a little bit of current and the fish are going to be migrating. But you know, water temperature is key. He is on the money with their metabolisms being slow, and you know, we find them after they spawn, they drop off into the shallow bays, generally with a black bottom or a sandy bottom, somewhere that they're, you know, within a couple feet of water, trying to sun themselves, and we can see them, and you can toss everything at them and they're just going to turn away from it. It'll hit the water and it scares them because the metabolism in their body hasn't just adjusted to it yet. But like this year with it was a later spring, but we got in a bit later, and I did get out for a few days and we did a little bit of exploring, and we got to these warmer bays, and it started with the smaller fish chasing, and the bigger fish were still really lethargic. But within 2 days, with the heat wave that we had up here, it brought that water temperature up enough that it was almost every cast for, you know, for the 2 days that we were out. Unfortunately, we never landed any monsters. We definitely seen them, but you know, for sure, we'd have to slow the presentation down. And for me, in the springtime, you know, a sluggo or these Lunker City sinfish, just twitch it, cast it out, twitch it, bring it in nice and slow, and it seems to trigger a response. We found that the spoons, big body baits, just really had no effect. And the other one we were using was a big paddle tail, soft plastic that moves a lot of water when you can pull it really slow. You don't have to move it fast to make a lot of ruckus in the water. It seemed to be the baits that produced the best for us. This one just tore up. I mean, it's ready for the garbage, but I don't have too many more left, so I want to hold on to this one just in case. But water temperature is key, and for us, we definitely key in on the bait fish, which is suckers, and we find the bigger fish congregate at the mouth of the sucker creeks, and when the suckers drop back, they definitely enjoy having a snack. So when we're walleye fishing, every now and then, you know, they'll bite onto a walleye, and sometimes there'll still be the full tail of a sucker sticking out of its throat, and it just means that they're hungry. They're ready to go. They got to put some calories back into them.
Beauty. So, you know, Colin, you know, I had a question here that came in about, you know, when you're talking about the flies that you're choosing, are you attempting to match the hatch based on color pattern there, or are you looking to match based on size?
That time of the year, I find that trying to match the hatch doesn't seem to have the same impact it does when the water's warm, right? I'm not sure what Kyle has seen, and I'm glad you asked that question, because now I was talking about going slow. There's a fly here that somebody's called Northern Magic, and it was invented by a guy named Chip up in northern Saskatchewan. I've used long black woolly buggers, purple, black, and what do they look like? They look like a big leech. They don't look like any bait, and you fish them really slow. I was at Hearst-Air last year, and we flew into a remote outpost. I think it was Napkin Lake. I got a 46-inch pike that was all of 25 to 30 pounds. It was a huge female. And I cast it, and I literally had just pulled it once and was sitting there talking to Bill, gave it another pull, and it hit. It was sitting there looking at it on the bottom. It was topping 5-6 feet of water. Jet black bottom, just like Kyle had talked about. And you would think, again, we saw small walleyes. We had seen some perch. I tried them. They weren't moving on them. But big black, and it's funny because the same color and larger sizes like this one work really, really well in the fall when the water again is really cold. Their metabolism's starting to shut down, but they're trying to put on some more food, you know, a little more poundage before the ice comes in. And these big black, but only smaller, type flies. There's another one called a Murdich Minnow, works really well. You can see it's kind of chewed up. Worked really, really well at this time, fished slow. So I've got the red and whites, white ones like this and that, and they work, but overall my success rate with black in the spring, especially if there's any stain to the water, which in the spring you'll often get because, the lakes will flip and the water will go kind of dirty for 3, 4, 5 days, or you got a lot of wind after the ice has come off and it turns everything up. This works. Black works so well for pike, and I've seen it with guys throwing lures as well. But as Kyle said, really, really slow, something that gives off lots of vibration and near the bottom. They'll eat, but they're not going to chase.
All right, so listen, I'll throw it back to you, Kyle, and then we'll talk about this because, I agree, water temperature is really key. And what I found is that, and I'd like your comment on this, not every bay is equal. Like, not only do you need the color right, but it's got to be on the right section of the lake. So I'm wondering, can you comment on, that north versus south versus, east-west facing bay?
Scott, I kind of missed the question. I'm getting a bit of weather here right now, and it's coming down really hard. Could you repeat it for me again? Sorry about that.
Yeah, no. So folks, Kyle's actually up north in Dakina, so he's at an outpost here. So what I'm saying is, we're talking a lot about the water temperature, and my experience would be, when you think that sun comes up, goes kind of east to south to west, and so really the north bays are often the good ones to hit. I'm wondering if you would agree with that.
I'm not so. You would think, but we find the best places are wherever the bottom is shallow and close to the creeks that produce suckers, but not very far away with that darker bottom. It's just the water that warms up first, and that's where they migrate to. They seem to post spawn. They'll just sit there for a while, and then they definitely take off to their ambush points later on. But for about 10 days, they just disappear. We figured out where they end up going. We got very good at following these fish and seeing what their patterns and characteristics are. And that's what they love to do. They love to just be on the mend. And sometimes you'll see them and you can bounce a fly, a lure, a spoon. You can throw your tackle box at them. They want nothing to do with it. It just comes right down to water temperature. Once that water temperature gets to a certain comfort zone, they're on.
Okay. Listen, we got a question here about the mayfly hatch. I think we're talking later in the year for the mayfly hatch. So we'll comment that probably in the next segment. Colin, here's a question for you. Is when you're looking at a lake, if we don't have any major water systems coming in, where do you think those pike are actually spawning? Because we know from this conversation that they're going to stage close to that spawning ground. Where is the spawning ground?
Typically, they're going to be back bays. They're going to be areas where the water temperature is going to come up because they need that for the actual spawning and laying the eggs. So I always found, the areas that are choked with weeds and shallow in the summer, and they're not really that fishable. And if you do go in there and you fish them, you're going to catch those little hammer handles. That's where they're going to be. And it's amazing because I've gone into those bays and been on the bow of a boat, and I think they're logs, and they're just laying on the bottom, not even moving or swimming around. You think they're logs, and then you go, oh my God, that thing's got eyes, and you realize that thing's that wide across at the head. So that's the one thing. When you're talking about the direction, I mean, obviously they might favor, or you might have more active fish in a bay that's getting more sun based on the time of the year. And that can have a factor, but just like Kyle said, I think there's a combination of things here. They like to have the deep water nearby for security, or oftentimes they're not that far from where there's some sort of inflow or outflow, and especially if they got the white suckers or facsimile in there, because they're over there right away, because it's not too far after they spawn that the white suckers start coming in. And I want to actually mention something about that. I had the opportunity to fish with my daughter lake, and they had this area where there was an inflow, and it was like a back bay that had a tight entrance. You went through the entrance in the boat, and there was this big, beautiful bay, shallow, deepest spot was maybe 4 feet. It was just filthy with giant pike and big schools of white suckers. I felt so bad for these things because as we stood there and the cameraman was shooting this, there's all these toilet bowl flushes as another sucker died in this thing. And we went to top water and they were on it. I was throwing this big black fly. It's called a Weedman slider. That was some of the most fun I've ever had in my life catching pike. It was just, we got to the point where we didn't want to hurt them anymore. And we caught some money for the camera. So we took the hook and we got a pair of pliers and bent it flat and then cast out. And they would just hang on to it just to get the slow motion takes on this thing. But if you can find where the white suckers, and then, you know, Kyle's done his homework up in his system, he knows where they're going to be. You know, the walleye coming down the river's one, the white suckers going up to spawn and coming back down. We've seen that all over Northern Ontario. And that can be some of the most exciting fishing. And once that's over and the water temp's starting to come up, and you can always tell because the weeds start emerging, right, Kyle? And everything starts changing in the lake. So probably, you know, I don't know if you want to add anything to what I said there, Kyle, but that's kind of like the transition period in my mind till we get to summer. We get those longer, warmer days, the weeds are starting to emerge, and the insect activity, as the one gentleman was asking about, starts to happen, which brings in the bait fish, which brings in the pike.
Cool. So Kyle, I don't know if you want to add to that at all, or why don't you take us into the summer and let's switch it up. You get to go first. It's summer now. What are you using for lures of choice? What's the tactic and where are you going?
I think that after spring, once they go on the, you know, early spring and they start feeding up and they move on, there's kind of the late spring lull. They kind of just disappear for a few weeks, and they're really hard. You know, they're really hard. They just disappear. You know, our numbers will drop. A big fish will drop right off for a few weeks, and then it seems that once the weed growth starts and it gets to be about a foot underneath, you know, from the bottom, then the fish kind of go back to that. So it shelters the bait fish. Now the perch are into these areas. The suckers are also in there, and they migrate to it. So the water being still reasonably cold enough for them, you can find them in the shallower water. So we found what's really paid off for us in the last couple of years are pencil reeds. So areas that are closer to shore where the pencil reeds haven't breached the surface yet, but you know, if you didn't know they were there, it's just a maze of bait fish underwater, and those are the spots that we hit. So usually pencil reeds, or ding reeds people call them, because there's a lot of rocks around there. So there's also crayfish and other bugs and aquatics that are in there, and a lot of protection for these bait fish. But for large pike, that's our go-to. So before the weeds breach the surface and we end up with these big rafts of weed beds for, you know, early summer, you know, mid to late June, that's kind of the transition area where they seem to, you know, they go from their shallow bays, then they hit where the pencil reeds are not quite fully all the way up or breach the surface. And then once that happens, they just disappear into those huge cabbage weed beds. And, you know, they spend, you know, another few weeks there until the water gets too warm for them. And then they have to, you know, migrate to deeper water. But, you know, right at that point, my go-to is the storm kick and minnow 10-inch. They're more inclined to take a bigger bait as the summer goes on. And another thing we also use is, you know, bucktails. Any spinner and bucktail, they just seem to move a lot of water, create a lot of noise, and these fish will come a long ways to hit them.
Awesome. Colin, what are your thoughts on summer pike fishing?
I pretty much echo what Kyle was talking about. One thing I want to add to the spring, when you get to the late spring, and again, it depends upon, like if you're on the Attawapiskat, late spring, that's like mid-July. I mean, it's just everything's different way farther north. But if you're Northern Ontario, and I'll just say the Sault Ste. Marie and above, and you're in that mid-June, early June, and to me, that's summer kicks in by late June. Again, everything's been so funky with the temperatures the last few years. We've had cold springs, and I bring that up because I was fishing with my daughter at a place that is known for big pike, and we got there. First day was just magic. We were getting them in that 4 to 8 foot transition. The weeds were just starting to come up. It was perfect. And then that night it snowed, and the temperature plummeted, and you could not find a pike. They disappeared. And the only people that were catching them, there was both spin and fly fishers at the lodge when we were there. Nobody could find them. Some of the guys who were jigging in 25 feet of water with minnow tip jigs, very slow, were picking up pike. They were down with the walleye, but they were just sulking big time. And it took 3 days for that cold front to go through, which dropped the temperature of the water, which dropped their metabolism before they flipped in again and they started feeding. And it was very slow. It was really tough fishing. And it was, everybody, didn't matter if you were throwing rapellas, you were throwing cowbells, or cowgirls, nothing was working. So when you get into summer, to add to what Kyle's saying, that's actually some of the, again, it's very fun fishing, because the cabbage beds and the other types of structure they like to haunt or hang around, that becomes more defined. And as he said, when the water temperatures and it gets hot, they're going to move out of those because they can't be in that 6 to 8 feet of water. It really depends. I'll give you an example. Lake Nipigon. Lake Nipigon has really ice cold water. And I was there in August, and there were giant pike at 8 feet of water in these weed beds. They're not very big weed beds because the water's so cold, but they were there all through the summer. It really depends upon the watershed is like. And Kyle, maybe you want to add to this, because I know like where you are in certain areas, above Nikina, that whole area up there above Lake Nipigon, it's famous for having cold water upwellings in the lakes. It's one of the reasons why the fishing's so good up there through the season, because the lakes don't cook up like some of the shallower ones that are river fed compared to the ones that have got the spring fed. And where the springs are typically where the walleye move to when it gets hot. And it's just like the caribou and the wolves follow the walleye, and they're going to be around those springs. I don't know. Do you want to add to that, Kyle?
No, I think you're on the money. I think you're on the money with that. We definitely find that as the summer goes on, the water heats up. The bigger the fish, the more temperature sensitive it is, and it needs to find its happy area. And we have a bunch of springs in the middle of the lake. All our lakes are spring fed, cold water. And if you know where those springs are, in the deeper water, if you have good electronics, you can, troll over them. And the guys that troll seem to do really well with them sometimes, because you'll get them on the graph and they cover a lot of water, and you can just see these big hooks on your electronics just sitting there, and it doesn't take much. So another popular one is this kick and minnow, and we found over the last couple of years these Savage Gear line through trout, preferably the 16-inch in the perch pattern or the white and yellow, are killer. They're killer to buy as well, because I think the last one I bought was $75. But I mean, you hate losing one of them, but God, do they work? They work amazing. And when you troll those through those deep holes, they just can't resist it. And it's an easy meal, so they're more inclined to exert a little bit of energy for a big meal than a lot of energy for several small meals as the summer goes on. And we also find that timing is key. So if we know a storm's coming, pressure change, we like to hit the weed edges, not necessarily in the weed bed, but where these big cabbage beds are. We'll find that 8 to 10 foot of water, and we need adjacent deeper water. We need 20 foot or better close to it, and that's where they go to. So for a short period of time, so you can either fish them in their bedroom or fish them at dinner time, and it's all about timing. And sometimes you connect and hit it right and get them either right on the edge of the weed bed or in that deep water where they're suspended living. And it's August is our month. We've patterned them very well in August. We know where they go. We know what they bite, and we'll go from a couple big fish a day to everybody catching several fish in a day. Sometimes we'll have 20 over 40 in a week of big fish, which it's nice to see those numbers.
Let me throw this one out to either guy there. Colin, you might want to start because Kyle just went. We talked a lot about the speed in the spring. Safe to say we can crank up the speed once we get into the warmer weather?
Absolutely. In fact, I think that's pretty key. I guess the best way to put it, we always tell people to vary your speeds to find out where they're dialed in. As Kyle mentioned, if they've got a cold front coming in and they know it's coming, and the pressure system's got them on the feed, they're on the binge, I find they're super hot, they're super active. As a fly fisher, sometimes it's hard for me to move the fly, whether on the surface or subsurface, fast enough to get them to trigger. You'll see them follow. It's just like muskie fishing around where I live here in Ottawa. You got to really rock and roll it in to get them to move. But they're and bigger flies. I'm throwing. I've got flies here. I'll show you a couple of them. I got some big chickens I throw, and I'm using a 10-weight rod because, just as Kyle said, they're not eating minnows anymore. They're eating perch. They're eating large like flies like this. And this is I'm casting flies 8 inches, 9 inches. There are times when the smaller ones will work, and the top water especially, I've got some big rat ones. I've got one that looks like a duck that we throw, and again, you're ripping it in fast, and they'll chase after that duckling and hammer it. You can certainly see why when you see ducklings at the start of the season, Kyle, mother might have 10 of them, and by the end of the season, she's only got 4 or 3 left. But I'm using big flies like this. And we try to use lightweight patterns, a lot of the saltwater type materials that don't hold water so I don't blow my arm off trying to cast these big chickens. But, and I've got a bunch of flies. We can talk about the flies later, in terms of what some of my favorites are. But yeah, I definitely go to bigger flies. I'm varying my speed. Sometimes they want it slow. Sometimes I can put it right on the edge of the top of where the cabbages come up. In fact, sometimes those little windows you see on the cabbage, there'll be somebody big sitting down there, and I can bring a topwater early morning, late day, or on an overcast day, they'll move up and take. And then I'm working the edges. And just as Kyle said, if you've got a nice 6 to 10 foot deep cabbage edge going along, and there's 25 or more feet of water off to the side, you're going to have monster pike there, because they're going to go in and out based upon the conditions and also based on where the food is.
Right, yeah. So they're gonna basically slide up and down that depth range as they're snagging. Listen, Kyle, let me throw this one at you. 2 questions for you. One, I want to go back to what one of our visitors said was about the mayfly hatch. And I know we can't name the date, but can you ballpark? When is the mayfly hatch? Because it's not in May. And then I want to ask you about walleye fishing, because frankly, I would say 50% of the big pike I've caught, I've actually caught when I've been walleye fishing.
Yeah, once again, it all comes down to temperature, the type of year we're having, when the ice came off. There's so many factors in there. And some years, a few years ago, we had a mayfly hatch that lasted a month. It started every day, just a little bit. It wasn't all at once. So just every now and then, you'd see a little every night, and in the morning there'd be a few shads on the surface. But for the most part, it's usually end of June, that first week of July, typically where we are is when we'll see it. And it really only affects the fishing for part of the week. I'll say 4 days, but they'll still bite. It's just you're not catching one every cast. But I don't think the mayflies affect the pike as much as they affect the walleye.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And what's your experience at the lodge as far as your walleye anglers stumbling into some monster pike?
I think that it's a real possibility, whether it's spring, fall, or summer. If you're walleye fishing, there's always somebody that's going to be reeling in that 16 to 18 inch walleye, and a 40-inch northern is going to tackle it sideways. And if you're lucky, you net them both. But if not, it's some great excitement. But it happens. And later on in the summer, we'll see it more and more. They just want that bigger bait that's moving. And if you got a small, undersized walleye that unfortunately bit your walleye jig and it's darting around, it's darting for a reason, because something's about to eat it. So, once that, for a little while in the summer until the water gets too warm, it's whatever moves fast and is ugly, they want to crush. And they usually do. So whether it's a spoon, a big cowbell, big ugly fly, if it's moving fast and ugly, they're going to hit it. Just purely out of instinct. I'm not sure if they're hungry, but they whack it, and it'll almost rip the rod out of your hand sometimes. And it's a heck of a lot of fun. And those cabbage beds, they hold literally hundreds of little, small fish, 30 inches and under. And it's great for families and kids to bring kids out there, because they can go at it all day. The parents get tired taking fish off, but it's exciting. It keeps their interest up. They're not just, I'm bored. There's none of this, I'm bored.
Yeah. Listen, as people that watch the show that you and I did together, I was up there with my family last year, and I can say it is a great place. It is a great place for kids. Colin, any final thoughts on summer before we kind of move into some fall?
Yeah, I want to address the mayfly.
Yeah, please.
The reason why I bring this up and it's not that I'm encouraging people to use mayflies for pike, but I've been places and the mayflies are hatching. It's, you know, March Browns or whatever. And we've kept a few little pike, the little 5-6 pounders. They're just perfect to eat. And when we opened them up, they had hundreds of mayflies in their stomach. So the pike will eat mayflies too, because it's so easy when they're emerging and they're swimming up. They just swim around with their mouths open, same as the walleye are doing, just chomp, chomp, chomp. Not eating on the surface, but they're chomping away. And I've also been there and witnessed when massive, I was on actually Eagle Lake in the Northwest, I think it was 3 years ago at Century Lodge. And the conditions, we got this massive heat wave, and it was in June. And there's every mayfly in that system, because it was muddy bottom. It's at the southern end of the lake. It's rocky above. It was all mud where we were. They hatched. We shot as much as we could with the low light. And in the next morning, I mean, the whole lake was just covered. I mean, we were getting a float plane, and they had to take an hour to clean the float plane up before we could go. There were so many dead or dying mayflies stuck in every part of it. And they got the Pot was worried about it. But anyways, that whole week, the poor walleye fishermen, they couldn't catch fish. And same with the smallmouth bass. It just shut them down until it was all gone, and then everything resumed. I was lucky. I was fly fishing for pike and muskie. I had no problems. I was in the zone. But I don't really have anything else to add to what Kyle said. I mean, I think everything's bang on. And those little pike, that's kind of like when I tell people to get, try and get into fly fishing, I said, don't run out there and try and get trout. Go catch panfish, like perch and stuff. And those little pike, they're the same for a fly fisherman. Throwing flies on weed beds around, even where I live here in Ottawa, but up at Kyle's place. I mean, you'll have such a ball catching them. And they fight really well. Just make sure you got the long pliers, because they do have a propensity to hoover a fly all the way down. And that's why I always make them barbless, right?
Cool. Listen, I was going to comment on this. You've both mentioned, times that the fishing shuts down. And I think sometimes people forget that even in those great fisheries, that we have in these remote locations, you're still going to have some tough fishing from time to time. Would you agree with that?
I'll let Kyle go first.
Yeah, I mean, weather really is a factor with anything else. Weather and, moon phase. I mean, sometimes all the stars align and you can have one horrible day, but, that's when it's time to control what you can control and take care of everything else. But it does happen, but it's rare. Usually a really bad day fishing up here is still really good. So you kind of have to weigh it.
Yeah, it's perspective.
And I agree with you, Kyle. There's certain species I find that are a lot more sensitive to the weather than others. So a good example, brook trout, especially brook trout in a lake, smallmouth bass. Any of the bass anglers that are watching this, they know you get a cold front come in, you get those cold temperatures, bright blue skies right after it goes through. They're not happy fish. They just sit there and soak. And you could be fishing in places. I've been in Labrador and we've gone into rivers. We canoed in way, way away from the lodge, and the conditions, we know the fish are there, but they're just not going to eat. And then the next day, it's like somebody turned a switch and there's tons of fish being caught. So, but as Kyle said, a bad day would be a good day down here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, listen, let's make the transition to the fall, and then I got some questions here from the audience that aren't necessarily season specific. But who wants to take a shot then to say, listen, come fall time, how would you change things up? What would you do different? What tools would you use different? What locations would be different?
I'll let Kyle go.
We find they almost mimic what they do in the springtime. They go right back to almost the same areas. They're in a little shallower. They're into that dark water. And we go back to a bigger lure, but we slow it right down again. It just comes down to water temperature. And if you can present a very appetizing meal in front of them real slow, it's really hard for them to resist. But I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, you have to fish where the fish are. And, we've got really good at following them, especially in the fall. And they're creatures of habit, and they're always in the same spot year after year after year. Every year the lure might change just a little bit, or the color, something seems to work a bit better. But for the most part, they almost go right back to their same spring spots.
Awesome. Colin, what are your thoughts?
Agree with what Kyle's saying. A couple things is that I find in the early part of the fall, it's almost like gentleman's fishing. You get those warm, and by that I mean you get to sleep in. You don't have to be out there at the crack of dawn, and you don't have to stay out till dark. Because I find it's like this window from about 10 o'clock to about 3 o'clock, depending upon where we are in the equinox. But when the sun's out or it's a warmer day and it's cold at night, there's this window when they're on. And then once you get past that window, and it could be 3 or 4 o'clock, and it's still sunny out at 5 or 6, but they're done. They just shut down because the temperatures drop, the sun's kissing the tops of the trees now, and they just stop biting. I've seen this with bass. I've seen it with a number of other species in the fall. Again, that's late September going into October. As Kyle mentioned, slow. Really slow it down. I'm using sink tip lines. I'm using weighted flies. I'm putting it near the bottom. I will say that you have to play with it a bit. Unlike the spring where I was talking about using smaller flies and slower presentations, often sometimes I need to use bigger flies still because they're trying to maximize the number of calories that they're inhaling each time. So if they're going to expend energy to eat something, they're still trying to do a bigger food. And that applies to muskie around here. You got to throw big chickens in, but you just got to go slow. But when we get to the real late, I mean, we're just about to have ice and it's cold. All the cabbage beds are dead. There's nothing around them. Then I'm going to go with small, like these black flies. This one, the Northern Magic. They seem to work 6 inches, 4 inches, black, purples, olives, real slow near the bottom. They're not going to be chasing bait fish. When I throw these things, I might get the little guys, but if I'm hunting the big ones, slow and near the bottom.
Yeah, they're pretty efficient feeders come fall. What's your thoughts on body weight? Here's the question. What's the weight difference between the same fish in the spring versus you catch that same fish in the fall? Kyle, can you notice it?
Oh, definitely. They've definitely got some girth to them going into the fall. It's no comparison. You can tell a post-spawn female in the springtime that she's spawned out and she's kind of thready, but it doesn't take long for them. And you just can't. You're just shocked at the size of it because there's a lot of girth to it. You can almost not get your hands around them to grab them. But yeah, it's very noticeable late fall how much weight they've actually put on getting ready for winter.
Here's a question from a fellow named Rich, and what Rich wants to know is your favorite lure. He wants the specific recipe here, guys. Favorite lure, color, and size for mid-September trolling in a tea-stained lake.
I got something for Rich, I think, right here.
Big fire tank. Is that a flatfish?
It is, yeah. I have a whole. Let's have a look here. I have. Oh, you can see all that, but there's no shortage of lures. From flies to it's just a fraction of what we have. So I mean, I don't know. I don't even know how much tackle I have. I got a lot of big stuff, and later on in the year we like to tow all the big stuff around, and those line through trouts are great. Anything in a perch pattern, but yeah, that one's for Rich.
All right, so
I think that would be the fire tagger in the fall. It's a bright color, and it's got a rattle inside it, so it's going to make some noise. So sometimes in the fall we find the water gets a little darker than any other time of the year, and that brighter color seems to attract them quite a bit.
Cool. Colin, what are your thoughts there on Rich's question?
This is the first time I think Kyle and I don't agree because he said tea-stained, tannic water, or muddy. And my experience, it doesn't matter if it's Labrador, Northern Saskatchewan, or Northern Ontario. When you get that tea-colored water, I find black and orange, black, purple, dark colors, big silhouette. They can see it. They can find it easier. Sunny or overcast. Black seems to work really well, and especially if you can get it like this one's a smaller one, but black and orange, seems to work. Now, again, this is based on the stain. If it was clear water, I'd have a different opinion. But definitely in stained water in that late September, black. I go black and orange.
Yeah, I've had a lot of success with darker baits than, some of the guys I fish with. And I've often thought it's because if the fish is looking up, that contrast with the dark body, that's what they're looking at. The contrast, like it's creating a shadow versus the sky and the light. I've done real well. I've done real well fishing walleye on dark baits in tea stained water. So this isn't about walleye, but I thought I'd throw it out there. Here's a question here, which is, well, this isn't so much about catching big pike, it's about handling big pike. So thoughts on netting versus hand landing, and if netting, is there a size or style of net you like to use?
You want me to go first, Kyle?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a really good question. And first off, let me just say, before I answer about the big fish, all my problems I ever have with pike are little fish.
Yeah.
If something's going to slice my hand up or put hooks into me, it's a little guy. So they're the ones I'm usually the most cautious with. The big fish, I'm so worried about hurting them. I bought a big fraybill net that's used for muskie, and I actually bring it into the lodges now wherever we go. I've used the cradle, but I've lost too many good fish bringing them in the cradle, and it just takes that pause. The guy's not paying attention, and they squirt out the end with you don't expect them. They do a little kick. So I'm a big fan of using a big net like that, keeping them at the side. I've actually got some big rings we put around that are floaters to make sure it doesn't sink. And we can unhook the fish, keep it there, and even lift it up and get a picture, especially if you've got a friend in another boat, come over and you're not hanging the fish vertical, which there's a lot of, people who have got different opinions about it, but I just err on the safety side. These big fish are generally females. They're the ones that are carrying the whole future of that lake or river, and you don't want to hurt them. So if I catch them, I try to keep them in the net, line them with the net, and as anybody knows, those fraybill nets, and there's other manufacturers, they're made not to hurt them, whether it's the way that the netting's made, they're deep enough, they're big enough. Even if they're bouncing around a bit, they don't tear up their jaw. If you got hooks and stuff like that, they're just easier to manage the fish. Keep them in the net at the side, lift it up, get your picture, and then just let them slide out. And I don't hurt the fish.
Kyle?
I agree. We use both. I was a fan of the cradle, but you're right. If you have a bad cradleman or somebody that's not experienced with it, you can lose some fish that way, and I know a lot of people do. But the joy of the cradle is there's two bonuses to it. It fully when you lift that fish out of the water, you can work on it over the side of the boat. You can keep it in the water, and it's really good for keeping hooks out of people. Because if you bring them into the boat sometimes and they're outside of that, they're flopping around the bottom of the boat, and you can damage the fish and hurt them that way. It's one of the reasons why I like the cradle, because you can control them a little better. But I've never used a big musky net like Colin's talking about. So, it's something to try in the future down the road. As long as whatever method you're using, as long as nobody is damaging the fish, and you can release them safely, and keep those genes in the water, because we know that big fish breed big fish, and we wanted that gene pool to kind of go on forever, and that's the most important thing.
Colin, you're talking about the cradle. The issue I've actually had with the cradle, and I have cradles, but I've lost a number of fish, unfortunately, because if you don't get the net underneath the head, and if there's any hook hanging out, I've had to catch the exposed barb on the way in, and you can pretty much say goodbye at that point, because either that fish is getting off, or it's going to get so tangled that you want it to get off as quickly as possible so it doesn't get hurt. Yeah,
that's another reason why I try to, if I'm fishing to big pike, I have a pair of cutters, just like the musky guys do, and I get in there and I cut the hook. I'm just not going to hurt the fish because of that reason. Yeah. Could I jump in here, if you don't mind, and I want to bring up a couple points about, because it's related to what we're talking about for catch and release. And I didn't want to stay at the top. And everyone thinks the fly fishing are all about catch and release. No, I just said it before. If I'm going to keep a couple to eat, I like those little 5 to 6 pounders, 7 pounders. So you've got a nice amount of meat, very firm. And if you keep a couple of those, they don't have the impact on the ecosystem like the big monsters do. So I always let those go. They're really important. But going to that, one of the things that shocks some people in fly fishing is that one of the things that I learned was that, you know how you get the pike and they've got those massive jaws? And I'm talking the ones, Kyle, you know, the ones with, it looks like a shovel, that their head. It's like, and their eyes are way over here. And sometimes when they come at you following a fly or a lure, it scares you. They're so big, right? And menacing looking. I've had a number of them with big pike or big muskie where I'm using a single hook and I'm pulling it back like this, if I can show this right. And that pike comes up there and it goes and smacks it down real hard. Well, that fly, if I can show this to you, lays flat. I do a pull to strip set the hook and lift up, and there's feathers laying all over the surface, and I've lost that big fish. I'm like, what the heck happened? And it's because they've turned it on its side. I don't realize it. And unless that pike turns away from me and it slides into the corner of the mouth, I don't get them. So I got taught something by a guide who was really, he'd experienced the same thing I did. I've got this one on a fly. It's all beat up here. It's called the quarter chicken dinner. It's a great fly made by Steve May. It looks better. This one's caught literally hundreds of pike, and I still use it. But I don't know if you can see it. I have a treble hook on there. So It's got a single hook here, and then you use a piece of surgical tubing to put a treble hook on. The treble hook, the key to this, I've got all the barbs off. They're all flattened down, or I buy the barbless ones. You put that on there with this hook, and what happens is when they do that big crush and they smoke the fly and it goes sideways, you still have that treble. And when I do the strip set, I find 90% of the time they're in the corner of the mouths. So the next thing logically is then, well, what happens, Colin, when you catch those little, 24 inchers or 20 inchers that have a propensity to eat it and take it deep? Again, barbless treble hooks. I have the long nose pliers. I just go down, whoop, comes right out. Never have a problem getting those out. Never have a problem. I've never hurt a fish using the trebles, and I stopped losing big fish as an angler because I've got lots of big flies here where, they're wonderful patterns, but they've got that single hook, and I've had too many big fish, especially muskie. So if I'm going for those 40-inch plus pike and they have that big shovel head and they're real bony in there, I won't get the purchase unless I have the treble hook, and it doesn't hurt them. And if anything, like I said, I have the cutters and I can snap it right off if there is any problems. But I've never even had to use them, not once.
That's an awesome tip. Real good tip. So listen, boys, we're coming up to it's about 7:50. Why don't we go with this? Any final thoughts that you think that we should cover? Any general tips for catching big pike? Use your seasons, use your technique. Kyle, why don't we start with you? Anything that you wanted to add or we didn't cover?
Consistency and confidence. You have to be out there and you have to be confident that you know what you're doing. And I mean, confidence goes a long ways. You have to have lures that work, and you have to be fishing where fish are. And that's really the biggest thing is really, being out there, putting the hours in, and, eventually you're going to connect with them. Can't catch them on the couch.
Awesome.
Book your trip today.
Yeah. Well, I've often.
I guess I missed that. I missed the chance there. Yeah.
But the best weeks at those camps go for a reason, because the people know it's sometimes the best fishing. But Colin, you want to add anything in there? Any general thoughts?
I got lots. If you don't mind, give me 2 minutes.
I got time.
A couple things. So Kyle, you said something absolutely right. Here I am. I've got big fly boxes full of flies. I got another one over there. I got piles of them here. I haven't even shown anybody. And I always get them. I go to these fly fishing shows and I buy these flies, or I see a new pattern time. Everything comes out the same thing. I've got my 5 or 6 confidence flies.
Yeah.
And I always go back to them. Yeah, I like to play with the new ones, but you build this feeling, you know how to use it, you know how to retrieve it, you know the right depth to do it, the way to work it, moving the rod tip. you get in the zone. And I have that whether it's for fishing for trout or it's these big pike. It's the same thing. Next thing I just want to talk quickly is that about the rig. A lot of people think that fly fishing is complicated, and fly fishing is not complicated. You can make it as complicated as you want. And I know a lot of people who like to catch big pike, that's how they got into fly fishing, was doing that. There's some places throwing spinners and they want a little more challenge. Let me tell you, you catch a big pike or even a medium-sized pike on a fly, it's like sex for your arm. It's just so much fun. You really feel the fight, you feel the runs, you feel the hit. It's just so much fun. And going to that, the easiest thing, you got your floating line, you got your sink tip, whatever it is, but say I'm going to talk about a floating line, which you're going to use probably in most pike places about, I'd say 70 to 80% of the time. What I've got here is 6 feet. I use 6 to 8 feet of 50-pound mono. This is trilene, and you can see it's very stiff. Loop to loop to your fly line, and then to that, a piece of bite wire. And I've got about 24 inches here going to the fly. I'm using, this is Rio bite wire. You can use the fixed, everyone sees those ones you buy with the clips that you can get at Canadian Tire or wherever you price it, and they're 7 or 9 strand wire. They'll work, but they're really not fun to cast. What you want here is this soft wire, because it'll move and it won't impair the action of the fly. So again, the same thing, that wire, loop to loop. And what happens is, as you're cutting back and you're changing flies, when it gets too short, you just unloop it, tie in another loop of this stuff, 18 to 24 inches, and you're back in action. And I don't know, school, this is like $15. But the key is, no matter what product you use, I like the supple 30, 40-pound wires. I've never lost a muskie or pike using the system. I have lost them trying to use straight fluorocarbon. I know some of the muskie anglers like to use the 80-pound fluorocarbon. I've seen them cut it. You get them the wrong place, the wrong way, they will cut it. I like 7 or 9 strand wire. I don't lose fish. This is easy to cast. It's easy to change. I'm into simple. Simple is fun, especially when I'm cold.
Hey, listen, Colin, we got another question here it's right up your alley here. It's very specific. Ideal rod and fly line to use in the Georgian Bay Honey Harbor area.
Okay, good question. I'm a big fan of, first of all, I like using 9 or 10 weight rods. And the reason why, it's not about the size of the fish, it's about the size of the flies. You want to have a lot of power. And the nice thing is, if you get one of these 9 or 10 weight rods, you've got the versatility to use it for saltwater and other species, big species. You want fast action. And in terms of the line, it's not about the brand. There's lots of good companies out there that make different fly lines. We deal with Scientific Anglers. We dealt with Rio. But it's more about the head. They now make fly lines, floating fly lines, that are specific to pike and muskie. And what they have is a very short head, which helps you load the line easier and cast big wind-resistant flies like this, especially this one's a rabbit strip. So it's going to be carrying a bit of water. But even if I'm throwing, let me find a bigger fly here. Like here, there's a rat pattern. And this throws off water, but it's wind-resistant. And I could be on Kyle's Lake there, punching it into the wind, putting it on top of the cabbage beds. If I've got a 9 or 10 weight, I can really punch that fly out. So to answer the question, 9 or 10 weight rods, fast action, and I would get the floating pike or muskie taper. The shorter the head and thicker it is, the better. And if you're going to be in that region, you're going to have the pike go deeper in the middle of summer and early September. You might want to get a sink tip, and you're looking for a 15-foot sink tip. I would get a type 6 to get it down. Type 6 means it's going to sink it at 5 to 6 inches per second to get that fly. It doesn't matter what size it is, because if you throw weighted flies, it's really difficult. You got to open your loop and stuff like that. And if you get one in the back of your head, besides having a few tears in your eye, if you're bad, you're unlucky, and you did with my event, took my advice and put the treble hook on. Now you got to dig that out as well. That's why I really like using sink tips. Let the line do the work for you. You still have to open your loop, but punch it out, count it down, start stripping. Sink tips are wonderful, 15-foot head.
Awesome, awesome. And listen, Kyle, I know you do some fly fishing too. Full disclosure here, I've never done fly fishing. And now I have a good collection of spinning rods, probably more than my spouse would like to know that I have. And so what is, if someone's just starting, you know, is there a good multi-purpose rod that you could recommend? Again, not brand, but maybe weight.
If they're, I guess if they're getting into predator fishing, I believe an 8 or a 9. I'm a fan of the 9 weight just because it's more versatile. And I mean, there's some great fly shops out there that you can go to. And I always tell people that if you're getting into fly fishing, buy the best gear that you can afford. Just simply because you can go to a fly shop and you can buy, somebody traded in a rod and a reel, and you can get a really quality product that off the shelf that, you know, isn't coming from, you know, Walmart or Canadian Tire that's already got the line on it, because, you know, the cheaper products are going to make your fishing experience not as much fun. So, you know, buy the best product or the best gear that you can, and you know, the fly shops will help you out with you know, maybe a used setup. And, you know, for me, like Colin said, I always go with the sink tip. You know, 15-foot sink tip. I think it's 350 grain, and I barely ever take that off, because the flies that we're using are, you know, like he said, they're basically wet tube socks all the time, and I need that little bit of weight just to sink them subsurface, because if we use straight floating line on them, they tend to stay on top of the water. Just want to get them down, you know, 2 feet or so.
Okay, Colin, thoughts?
Totally agree. There are some brands out there. I mean, I don't want to play the brand thing, but I will say, like, obviously we work with Orvis, and Orvis has got a line of rods, and they're $200. You can get an 8 or 9 weight rod for $200, and it's got a 25-year warranty. So if you step on it in the boat, they'll give you another one. So if you check with the local fly shop or go to orvis.com, you'll see them in there. But the bottom line is you don't have to spend a lot of money. There are $800 rods, $800 US rods you can buy, but you don't have to do that. You can spend $200 at sale, or I think sale carries Orvis, and obviously fly shops do. But $200 will get you into a great rod. You'll still need to get a reel, but you don't need a big drag system, just a basic reel. Or as Kyle mentioned, look, there's some great deals at some of the places that are trade-ins or on Kijijis, things like that. Last thing, I know we got 1 minute here, or we're just at the end. I want to show people a fly that I love. This fly, it's called the Murdich Minnow, M-U-R-D-I-C-H, invented by a gentleman down in Michigan, and it's my #1 killer pike pattern right now, and it works everywhere. This one's a perch pattern. It can be white, it can be two-tone, all black with a bit of orange on the bottom. Is super deadly. But the key is, and I don't know if it'll pick it up, there's a rattle attached to it. So the combination of the rattle, the tail that moves, and it's very lightweight and easy. I can throw this on a 6-weight rod and not have any problems with it, because it sheds the water. It's all synthetic materials. This fly has caught me more pike in the last 2 years than I can mention. And I actually have it, a smaller version. And you were talking about walleye? That's our #1 walleye fly, the Murdich Minnow, in black with a bit of orange on the bottom. Same thing, it's got a rattle. And I've caught big pike when I'm throwing that. So my daughter caught a 30-inch walleye on this fly. Whoa. I know, she beat her dad. My biggest was 29.5 at that point, and she got a legitimate rod in the boat, put it against the gunnel, measured 30 and a quarter. It was like all of 10, 12 pounds. It was a big walleye on that fly.
Big fish. Beauty. All right, listen, guys, thank you both for the time tonight. That's a lot of great advice, a lot of great tips. And I'll put it in the show notes where you can find more information about these folks. If you want to check out Kyle's Lodge, we have a session there on Meet the Outfitters, so you can learn all about Grace Lake Outfitters. I've had the pleasure of fishing twice up there. Outstanding. And listen, Colin, I didn't know this until recently. I watched your show on Amazon Prime, so I did not know that it's available on Amazon Prime. So
if you can watch it on Amazon Prime, we're on the World Fishing Network. In the United States, we're on public television, and in Canada, obviously, a lot of people watch us on YouTube. We're on a bunch of networks, but YouTube's by far become our biggest broadcasters and And if I can just get it on Netflix, everyone will get it.
Awesome. All right, listen, thanks so much, everybody, for viewing. And if you're watching this on a recording, I'll make sure that the contact information is in the show notes for you. Thanks very much for everybody joining us. I'm going to stop the live feed now.